Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. It's an honor to present my honors thesis to you, Poverty, Domestic Violence, and Intimate Partner Homicide in the United States. There's a couple of things that I'd like you to keep in mind when you're listening to this presentation today. One thing is that according to the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 1 in 4 persons will experience domestic violence in their lifetimes. That is a very large number. I'd also like you to remember that according to the Centers for Disease Control, the outbreak of domestic violence will be considered an epidemic were it a medical diagnosis. So just keep that in the back of your mind while we're talking about this today. Also keep in mind that poverty, domestic violence, and intimate partner homicide work together. They're part of a bigger social system, a system of social inequalities that prevent a certain group of people from overcoming their circumstances through oppression. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to give a couple of operational definitions for domestic violence. In particular, it's really important to consider the operational definition for domestic violence today because I was getting only reported incidents of physical, mental, or sexual abuse perpetrated by an intimate partner in order to obtain power and control over another. This is particularly important because we know from past research that only about 20% of domestic violence incidents are reported and only about 6% of them are convicted. The operational definition for intimate partner homicide is pretty self-explanatory. It's a death that occurs in a domestic violence incident. Poverty's operational definition is an economic state where basic necessities cannot be adequately funded. At this time, it is plus or minus $25,000 in annual income. I have some numbers here for you, some percentages. In the United States, according to the National Census Bureau, in 2001, 13.5% of the population was living in poverty. If you'll allow me for a moment, I'd like to give you that representative number in individuals. For 2001, that would be 32,907,000 individuals living in poverty for that particular year. Just think about the massive amount of people living in that. Okay, the second one is in 2004, 9.3%, 37,040,000 individuals living in poverty in that year. So this provides a basis for my hypothesis that poverty, domestic violence, and intimate partner homicide would correlate across the years. That would be that those things would correlate with fluctuations in the poverty rate in the United States. This slide is representative of the effects of domestic violence on our communities. I'd like in particular to point out that it crosses all ranges of ethnicities and all age groups. Elder violence is becoming a focus in research lately. We also have domestic violence with women and men, women perpetrating domestic violence on male partners. This in particular is extremely important to me, and this is child witnesses of domestic violence. I'm a domestic violence survivor. My mother was a domestic violence survivor, and my daughter was not. This is my daughter, Heather Marie Boger. She died when she was 18 years old in a domestic violence incident, which was the catalyst for my research today. So, to my hypothesis, and getting on with the scientific part of this program. Reported incidents of domestic violence and intimate partner homicide will correlate with the rise and fall of poverty levels in the United States. So I went on and I looked at some relevant historical literature. These are two theories, and at first when you look at them, you're going to think that they are in conflict with one another, but I propose that social exchange theory leads to the violence in relationships, and that bargaining theory is the way out. Social exchange theory states that violence can occur as a result of an imbalance of power within a relationship. Now, logically, if we all think about this, this is definitely true. There's friction. One person has more power over the other one. This can lead to violence in a relationship, especially when the person who is subjected to the violence is unhappy in the situation. Secondly, we have bargaining theory here, where increasing economic resources enables the victim to either bargain for better treatment or threaten to leave. So next I looked at a study where they asked survivors of domestic violence, women in transition in particular, there were no men in this sample, how they achieved their successful transitions. And they stated that it was through social support, community shelters, counseling, and public cash assistance. So once again, we have the economic factor related to freedom from domestic violence. The method for my study was to gather materials from the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the U.S. Census Bureau, also National Poverty Center data. I performed some correlations on the reported incidence of domestic violence and intimate partner homicide and poverty data. This is an archival study of domestic violence incidents across time. I used a 15-year time span. This chart I find extremely interesting. Over here, you'll see the number of individuals. Down here, you'll see the years. Get my little sheet here because I want to tell you some things about this. Okay. If you look, you can see the relationship just visually looking at it. I find it very interesting that you have peaks and dips in the same place. There's some anomalies in here also. As you can see, there's a peak in intimate partner homicide in the thousands in 1998. I would explain this as open reporting methods are coming into place. People are able to report more often, so that is starting to happen. Also, something that I found when I was doing my research is that reporting methods are different for different places. And sometimes they are not aware of the victim-offender relationship. They don't go back and report that once they convict someone. They don't go back and look and say, oh, we didn't put this down as intimate partner homicide. So a lot of those are missed. I would say that this particular peak right here is because they implemented better reporting methods and it became more acceptable. Over here where you see this dip, I would say as an explanation for that, the social services became acceptable, reporting domestic violence incidents became more acceptable, and access to social services is becoming more popular and more available here for domestic violence victims. So on to the correlations. In my results, I found that there was a significant positive correlation between domestic violence and poverty. And if you know anything about statistics, this is a highly robust correlation. At 0.75, this is huge in the social sciences. You don't usually find a correlation this high. Secondly, there was a significant positive correlation between poverty and intimate partner homicide, extremely robust at 0.80, especially considering the sample size. This is a 15-year time span, and this is a 10-year time span. Extremely high correlation there. So for future research, I would suggest investigations into generational domestic violence, childhood interventions in particular. Child witnesses of domestic violence is another study that I intend to do in the future. It has a lot to do with perpetrating the cycle of domestic violence that I think is continuing in the United States today, a culture of violence that we're all becoming more and more aware of. I think we should investigate domestic violence and poverty further, financial empowerment effects on domestic violence, and holistic approaches as well as family treatment. I think the big new thing in domestic violence treatment is going to be perpetrator interventions. If you do not give the perpetrator an opportunity to change, if you do not provide them with the tools to understand what they're doing, where they're going, how they can help themselves, they leave one domestic violence situation and go right on to another one. Perpetrate the cycle, continuing, just like untreated child witnesses of domestic violence do the same. So, enter the North Alabama Women's Community Equity Project. This is a project that I've been working on for the last 2 years. I intend to open this project in 2016 at the completion of my master's. It will focus on building community equity for domestic violence victims. What I mean by building community equity is our community needs to make an investment in these disadvantaged individuals. This will get a return. These individuals will make an investment in return and feel like they belong, feel like they have a connection to their community. How I intend to implement this is to have community service projects across the cities and put people, community leaders like Dr. DeLugich, for instance, and Bianchi. Take these people, put them in the same t-shirts and the same jeans with the same shovel as a disadvantaged individual from the shelter. Give them an equal power base, send them all out in a van to fix this old man's yard that the tree fell down. He's living in poverty and has no one to help. to build a wheelchair ramp for the lady whose husband recently became disabled. Working on these projects together will build community equity, provide a valuable community resource for aiding disadvantaged individuals. I intend to implement targeted therapies, vocational training, educational assistance, family counseling, that big one, child witness counseling, perpetrator intervention, and then also continued aftercare support. There's research out there right now stating that after 12 months of intervention, the positive effects tend to wear off. We need longer-term continued aftercare. So if you have any questions, feel free to talk to me after the presentation, but I'd also like to state that you can go to any of these websites, in particular Crisis Services in North Alabama. If you know someone who's experiencing domestic violence, has confided in you, please feel free to send them to that website. The phone number is 256-716-1000. That's a 24-hour hotline. You can go to the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence. It's acadv.org for further information, and also Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Data Resource Center as listed on the bottom. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are child witnesses more likely to become victims of domestic violence or perpetrators, or could it be both?
Both. It could be both. And you get sometimes, in particular, and I can't state exactly where this came from, I read it somewhere, but in particular, the girls that witnessed domestic violence in their youth, as I did, tend to go on to self-harm behaviors, and they also tend to search out these type of relationships due to homeostasis. You search for what you know, and it's a subconscious thing. They don't actually actively search for those relationships, but they seem to gravitate towards them, and also harmful behaviors. Men with young boys, it can go either way. Of course, if you have intervention, it makes a difference, but they can also become perpetrators. And there's something else too. Retaliatory violence, when you retaliate to someone who's physically assaulted you, is something that comes into play with this as well. And I believe that women who have witnessed domestic violence in their childhood are more likely to commit retaliatory violence in their adulthood. Does anyone else have any more questions? Did I answer your question sufficiently? Thank you
Other questions?
very much.
All right. Well, thank you again.